increasing. Sorry about that. Following college, Frank and Joy settled in Lake County in 1980. Here they raised their family and became increasingly involved in the local community. Frank served as vice president of Lake County Education Association and vice chair of the Florida Education Association Governmental Relations Committee. Since then, Frank has served 4 years as a board member and communications director for the Golden Triangle Democratic Club. He also serves as a board member for the Lake Voices of Reason, a group instrumental in preventing the Lake County Commission from carting in and installing a Confederate statue memorial in Tavares in 2020. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to Frank.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for attending. I want to start off by thanking the Interfaith Council of Lake County for putting on this timely program. The subject of the Gaza-Israeli strife is being discussed around dinner tables, and it's the subject of conversations between neighbors. It's an old subject. Our objective here tonight is to shine some light. Now, there's going to be a few rules of the road as we approach this forum tonight. Again, I'm going to reiterate that everybody should please mute except for the forum participants so that there's no extraneous noises to distract. During the program, if you have a question, please type it into the chat room on the Zoom here. The chat room feature is located by dragging your cursor, if you're on a computer, down toward the center bottom of your screen, and you'll see it pop up and you can just type right in there. Then at the end of the period, we'll use those questions. Anwar and Dennis will be selecting them to be answered by the panelists. During the program, if you have that question, be sure to jot it down. First, there will be a round with each panel member speaking for 4 minutes. And they will be able to respond to first we have 4 minutes, and following that, there will be a second round of 4 minutes to respond to previous comments or to expand on one's original thoughts. Now, during that time, we're going to be a little lenient on the second round and let people talk back and forth and crosstalk and so forth, because that's the best part of a discussion, is sharing the ideas. In the last part of the program, your questions will be selected from the chat room by Anwar and Dennis, and then the questions will be posed to the panelists. And now to begin. We are fortunate to have some wonderful panelists tonight. Allow me to introduce our distinguished presenters. We have with us Imam Dr. Shady Mohammed Alshorman. Imam Shady is currently the Imam of the Islamic Center of South Lake County. He is originally from Jordan and has been living in America since 2006. Imam Shady has his PhD in Islamic Studies from the Graduate Theological Foundation and is working on another PhD in religious education at Fordham University in New York. He is a certified Arabic and Quranic teacher. He is the co-founder of the Interfaith Council here in Lake County. We also have with us Reverend Drew Willard. Reverend Willard is an ordained minister of the United Church of Christ, who is currently an artist and storytelling evangelist. After service in the U.S. Army, he received his Master's of Divinity from Lancaster Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania and served churches in Connecticut and Florida. Biblical storytelling and graphic arts have been important interpretive skills he brings to ministry. Since the 1990s, he has been performing his own paraphrased translations of the Gospels and has used his drawings for PowerPoint presentations for liturgical readings, as well as bulletin cover illustrations. He has organized and participated in numerous interfaith worship events, including evenings of sacred storytelling with storytellers from other faiths. We also have with us Lara Abu Ghannam. Lara is a daughter of Muslim Palestinian immigrants who taught her how to be hardworking, strong, and determined in the face of adversity. Raised in the American South and the post 9/11 world, and growing up to the news stories of the occupation of Palestine, Lara has found herself committed to challenging bigotry and racism from a very early age, eventually leading her to joining grassroots organizing at the age of 13. Her path led her to law school, where she received and was the sole candidate for the Certificate in Human Rights and Global Justice Studies, and is now a bar licensed attorney. Her activism and work are focused on challenging international human rights violations, government surveillance, police brutality, Islamophobia, and Orientalism. Lara is based out of Orlando, where she sits as the Central Florida Regional Coordinator for the Council on American Islamic Relations here in Florida. We also have with us Mort and Hess. Mort is a retired actuary from Albany, New York. Let me repronounce that, Albany, New York, sorry. Now living here in Lake County. Mort spent his preteen years in the city before moving to upstate New York. His undergrad was in Albany and postgrad work in Syracuse in the mathematics field. He completed his education with a master's in actuarial science from Northeastern in Boston. Morton is also a fellow of the Society of Actuaries. Mort has been married to his wife since 1973. And Mort, I should point out, you identified your wife as your beautiful wife. Nice job. And together they have faithfully instructed the other members and spouses of the Education Committee on all the ins and outs of preparing and serving a tradition, Seder meal. Other interfaith Lake County events that Mort has participated in include forums, prayer services, and most recently, evenings of sacred storytelling. His lifelong hobby has been the theater, where he has been performing for more than 60 years in a variety of settings and a variety of roles. And those are our four panelists tonight. So let's get started. Now, we are fortunate to have this good panel tonight. And in your presentations tonight, panel, I'd like you to touch upon three specific things, if you could. And not required, but if you think about it. One, why do you feel it's important to participate in this type of forum? Two, what is your general assessment of the Gaza-Israeli conflict? And three, what solutions do you see for the short, medium, and long term? Now that's a lot to chew on, of course, and you may respond in any way that you feel is helpful or choose a completely different approach to the topic. Let's begin. Ladies and gentlemen, let's start with Imam Shady Alshorman. Imam?
Yes, good evening, everyone. I would like to start by this prayer. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, praise be to the Lord of the universe who has created us and made us into tribes and nations that we may know each other, not that we may despite each other. If the enemy incline towards peace, do thou also incline toward peace and trust in God. And the servants of God, most gracious, are those who walk on earth in humility. And when we address them, we say peace. It's my pleasure to be with you tonight. Islam was never ever an enemy of Judaism. Islam's relationship with Judaism is completely based on affection, love, and freedom of belief. Judaism is one of the three monotheistic religions. Jews, Muslims, and Christians in Palestine share languages, history, land, culture, food, and drink. Jews and Christians have lived with Muslims and still live with them in countries such as Yemen, Iraq, Jordan, and Morocco. Muslims family holds the key of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Al-Ghudiya family in Jerusalem has been entrusted with the key of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. And they consider it an honor to protect the Christians' holiest place. When asked how he feels holding the keys to this important church, Ghudiya said, "The church is my second home. When I look at its gate, I can see my grandparents and my great-grandparents." He added, "I am proud of my family who holds the keys of the holiest and oldest church. This should not be a pride only to my family, but to every Muslim in the world." Islamic-Jewish relation started in the 7th century The two religions share similar values, guidelines, and principles. Islam also incorporates Jewish history as a part of its own. Muslims regard the children of Israel as important religion concept on Islam. Moses, peace be upon him, the most important prophet of Judaism, is also considered a prophet and messenger in Islam. Moses, peace be upon him, is mentioned in the Quran more than any other individual, and his life is narrated and recounted more than any other prophet. So, perspectives on the history of Jews, Christians, and Muslims may help us to understand the complex nature of the relationship. Prophet Muhammad encountered Jews in Medina. Jews had lived in the Arab Peninsula for centuries before and after Prophet Muhammad. Having that in mind, Islam, like any other religion, doesn't want violence to kill and displace its followers, to kill children, to kill women, to destroy mosques, to destroy cities. Islam is the religion of peace. Jews were protected many, many times by Muslims, especially in the Golden Age. Muslims group here in America helped raise hundreds of thousands of dollars to help Jews synagogue. In the meantime, the Jewish congregation did its own fundraiser for a New Zealand incident. So my point is, in this crucial time, that Islam was never ever an enemy of Judaism, but Islam will stand for its followers, to protect them, to save them, to keep them safe as any other human being. What we see every single day in the TV make us grieving, so much sad. I don't know what to say, but I would like to ask everyone this is simple, basic question. Can Jews, Christians, and Muslims live together again with peace? In Islam, my brothers, my sisters, Jerusalem is a very special place. Jerusalem is the third holiest site in Islam, after Mecca, after Medina, and the third holiest place is Jerusalem. Jerusalem is one of the three mosques towards which a religious journey is allowed in Islam. Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, the Masjid al-Aqsa or Al-Aqsa Mosque, it's only masjid in the Quran mentioned by name. Jerusalem also, it is the second masjid or mosque ever built. Jerusalem for Muslims was the first Qibla direction. People used to face their prayer toward Jerusalem. Jerusalem also, when Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was taking on the journey of the night from Mecca to Jerusalem. Jerusalem for Muslims also, the land around it is blessed. Jerusalem for Muslims, it is where the prophets and messengers intended and migrated to. For Muslims, Al-Aqsa Mosque is the abad of the Allah of the prophets. So this is what I wanted to share with you tonight, that in Palestine, in Jerusalem, we pray for them to live with peace, to live peacefully, and to live with each other as any part, as we live here in Lake County, Muslim, Jews, Christians, and many other religions. I think if we follow our religions, we are going to live peacefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Imam. We'll go to our next speaker at this time, and I'm going to call upon Reverend Drew Willard. Reverend Willard, if you would take your 4 minutes, please. Reverend, I believe you're muted.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
I invite you to prayer. Gracious God, deliver us from the pandemic of disease and the epidemic of violence. Empower us to work together, to cooperate in dealing with the pervasive problems faced throughout our world with comprehensive responses. And may your beloved community come to be on earth as it is in heaven, as an achievable social reality. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. I have been involved with interfaith outreach for many years. I had an interest to attend a trialogue of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim clerics. And I remember the Christian and Muslim clergy were getting in an argument about women's rights, and the rabbi was the referee. And I thought, how would any of us be ready for the Messiah to show up? How would we even recognize that event? And it occurred to me that perhaps we need to look at stories as the way that we share our stories, share our wisdom as family stories. You can't correct somebody for their family story. It simply tells who they are, where they came from, and also serves as a guide for what's ahead. An inspiration for me was hearing the conversation with Joseph Campbell, a comparative mythologist, interviewed by Bill Moyers for the public TV series The Power of Myth, in which Bill Moyers had asked Campbell about peace in the Middle East, and at the time it was Lebanon that was torn by violence. And Campbell said Judaism, Christianity, and Islam need their faith, their tradition, their story all the way. Love thy enemy. And that's been the basis of my efforts, my work, not only in providing opportunities for sharing stories, but even in having services together with Jewish, Christian, and Muslim. Love Sundays, we used to call them, and interfaith prayer services for peace. Our wider community, we're doing these. So I think that's an important effort to make as an example that it's not the religions that are the problem. It's not that we can't work together. And amazingly, that devotions seem to be one of those places where we can work together. You'd assume it'd be charitable works, but it is in sharing our stories. We don't have to be the same. In fact, our differences are an advantage. Now, my general assessment with the situation in Israel and Gaza is that the problems are pervasive, and it's been hardened over a period of time. Microaggressions on top of macroaggressions, and so there's a lot of bad feeling. The only way out of this is to forgive. It can't be simply by militarism. It can't be by crushing one another. There's got to be a meeting of the minds, which is literally what repentance means. Now, that said about the pervasive problems, it demands many ways to approach this. And the way that the spiritual religious community can help is, first of all, to provide the wisdom of our traditions, of our stories. And so we don't have to reinvent the wheel necessarily, but can draw on these stories for inspiration, for ideas, for what to do. In my thinking about where do we go from here, first of all, my tradition with Christianity, the Gospels, what the stories teach me, is that Jesus sent his disciples out 2 by 2 to conquer the world in a good way by evoking hospitality. They were sent out with no money bag or extra clothes, and not to talk to others on the road, which meant they were to focus on the homes that they would visit, that they were there to help plant communities of faith, and that these were not just simply homeless people sent out. They were trained homeless people who were sent out to drive out evil spirits, to heal people in their distress, even if it's basic first aid, and to plant these seeds of beloved community, which is through the songs and stories of the faith. And all this was a strategy again to evoke hospitality. Now, traveling 2 by 2 these days is not so convenient, but Zoom helps us to reach across the distances and to reach diverse communities. Now, some stories that have provided some perspective for me in this current but ongoing crisis for Palestinians and Israelis include Jesus' teaching of binding up the strong man, binding up not necessarily people, binding up the evil spirit of manipulation, coercion, militarism, corruption. Jesus' exorcism of the man with a legion of demons is about unbinding a strong young man who has no job or prospects for a future, who gets caught up in criminality and even terrorism. Jesus' confrontation with the Syro-Phoenician woman of Greek heritage. In the first century, the memory of the Greek occupation would have been a bitter one. They were hated by the Judeans and Galileans. And Jesus was in that region. He was frustrated with his own people. They were not getting his message. Here he was. He gets away, and this Greek woman seeks him out and asks for help for her daughter. And he says to her, it's not right to give the children's food to the dogs, which would be part of the culture. He was a person of his culture. And she says, those puppies are waiting under the table for those little babies and dropping their crumbs. And Jesus said, you're speaking the truth. Your daughter is healed. And what that represents to me is that Jesus set the example for you can change your mind. You can learn and change from your prejudices. You can, and that's what repentance means. It means to change your mind. And binding up the strong man through throughout the world, people are opting for strong men, giving up their freedom, and in the process, we're seeing this happen with Gaza and Jerusalem. They need to recognize their strong men have failed them, and they need to fire them for their counterproductive macho militarism and economic corruption. Perhaps it is time for both sides to listen to their women as political leaders, like Hanan Ashrawi among the Palestinians, and Omer Yankelevich, if I got that name right, an Orthodox woman in the Knesset. Okay, I'm not saying I know necessarily that they're qualified or whatever, but these are voices in the political systems on either side. And the idea is to have a different set of priorities, i.e., the top priority should be the next generation. Stable homes rebuilt with Israeli help, not settlements alone, undisputed land for Israelis, but for Palestinians too. Jobs, education, cooperation, an integrated society, 2 states, but acting as one nation. Mutual defense and mutual economic benefit. When I was a child, we moved to Sprague Avenue, South Plainfield, New Jersey, the same week a Jewish family moved in next door. The Willards and the Salants got along so well that our dads built a wooden rail fence around both houses with the gate that opened to the fields beyond, with no fence between. The Willards and the Salants are friends to this day, even though we've moved on from that particular neighborhood. The families, two houses, two family histories and stories, and that would be my hope for Israel-Palestine. And if this is not too controversial, there needs to be a place in Jerusalem for the Palestinians to call their capital. It's the capital of the world. Why not? And I think that would be my hope for Israel. This two states, but with a fluid border, they should be working with each other. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend. I appreciate that. We'll now go on to our next panelist, and that would be Mr. Mort Hess. Mort?
Thank you. Hine ma tovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. The prophetic vision, how good and how pleasant it is for brothers to dwell together in unity. A vision to be achieved with difficulty. As the Holy Scriptures point out, I come from a dysfunctional family. We all do. Brotherhood is not easily attained. We can start off with Cain and Abel. We can go on to Ishmael and Isaac. We can go on to Jacob and Esau and Joseph and his brothers, etc., etc. The point is that sibling rivalry is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in that it shows that differences are as important as similarities. And it is important except in the first item that I mentioned there, the Cain and Abel thing, brothers, after being separated, were able to get along. In other words, they lived adjacently, sometimes together, but separate. At least they had their own areas where they were dominant and could say, this is mine. I can share peaceably with my brother, but I've got my part and he's got his part, etc., etc. One of the promises of the United States was that we would try to get to the utopia where brothers could dwell together in unity, but separately. In other words, where each acknowledges that the brother has the same rights that that one person demands for himself. Where one must be dominant over the other is going to be bad business all the way around. After the flood, I mean, there were only 3 brothers in the whole world. Did they live together? No, they went separately. So that what we have in Israel in general here is a situation where it is not good for one side to feel they have to rule the other. As a matter of fact, I know Israel doesn't want to rule Palestinians. Right now in the West Bank, in Gaza, and 95% of the Palestinians are in fact under the local rule of the Palestinian Authority and Hamas and what have you, rather than directly under Israel for services in general, and it's all the civil government. I was almost 11 in 1947, the end of 1947. There could have been a Palestinian state right then, but that was not to be. As the Imam Shady pointed out, for 1800 years, in general, the Jewish population in Islamic territories were treated much more favorably than under the Christian, than in the Christian territories. As a matter of fact, it was only until the 30s when, as a result of Nazi Germany's ambitions, that more virulent anti-Jewish sentiment started to appear within the Islamic community in Palestine. There have been several opportunities since 1948 for the establishment of a Palestinian state. Each has been rejected by the Palestinians because it was all or nothing. I remember, the slogan still is from the river to the sea. As long as the Palestinian movement endorses the eradication of the Jewish state and the elimination of the Jews in many respects, there can be no peace here. I'm most concerned that over the years, the Jewish attitudes have changed. 30 years ago, let's say, there was almost a universal thing. All right, as soon as the Arabs want to make peace, we'll make peace. Now, unfortunately, the politicians, the Jewish politicians, some of them anyway, as well as the Arab politicians, find that it's easier to point the finger and say all your problems are their fault, rather than to actually try to make things better for their own populations. So the current thing was a combination of political machinations on both sides, in my opinion, anyway. There was an election in Israel where it looked like one of the Arab parties was very close to forming a coalition to replace Netanyahu. He wouldn't have none of that. So he had to be a little harder in response to Arab provocations and what have you. So, and then of course Hamas wants to well, I'm going to be the leader of the Palestinians of the whole Arab thing. So they had to start throwing rockets, and then there's this and that, and everyone, all the politicians took their opportunity to try and solidify their own political agendas, as opposed to trying to find peace and prosperity for their respective constituencies. I think that I would like to recommend the book Contested Utopia, Jewish Dreams and Israeli Realities, talking about a dual nation state with combined facilities in many cases, but separate areas of civil authority.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mort. I appreciate that. You mentioned the book. If you would like to type that into the chat room, thing, people can then see the title of it if they wish to pursue that, okay? Thank you very much, Mr. Hess. We'll now go to our fourth speaker. This is Ms. Lara Ghannam from CAIR. And Lara, you have your 4 minutes.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you, Interfaith Council of Lake County, for inviting me to join this esteemed panel to discuss the human rights violations and humanitarian issues that are experienced by the Palestinian people, and to share facts you may not have heard of because unfortunately it's not covered in mainstream media. But before I get into any of that, I do want to begin with the importance of language. This is not a conflict. This is not a war. That insinuates that there are equal sides of power. This is an occupation and the resistance by the occupied. This is an occupation, this is apartheid, and this is ethnic cleansing, all under the definitions by the international community and applied as such in hundreds of United Nations resolutions, Amnesty International reports, Human Rights Watch reports, and by so many others. This applies to the West Bank and Gaza. Gaza is a city. It's under a land, sea, and air blockade by the Israeli government. The Israeli government refuses anyone to go in and out except occasionally press, including medics. They refused imports and exports, including food and medical supplies. Every few years, you hear of a siege on Gaza where the Israeli government rains bombs on the people, destroying all kinds of infrastructure, from homes to hospitals to school. In fact, just a few days ago, an Israeli war pilot was interviewed by an Israeli news channel where he said that they bombed Gaza to vent out their frustrations on the Palestinian people. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza is egregious and horrifying. Death tolls rise with every siege, mainly children, and children suffer from extreme PTSD. Children as young as 12 years old have lived through 4 sieges and attacks on Gaza. Now, can you imagine that? Having lived through the horrors of bombs going off, destroying homes and their schools, losing family members with each siege. I cannot imagine that trauma and horror. And in the West Bank, Palestinians are subjected to apartheid and ethnic cleansing, where illegal Israeli-only settlements are being built in Palestinian land. Israeli settler organizations are forcibly dispossessing Palestinians, stealing their homes and moving in, often even without allowing Palestinians to remove their belongings first. The Israeli government calls this a real estate dispute, but oftentimes the homes lived in were built by Palestinian families from generations before. This is not a real estate dispute because under international law, East Jerusalem is Palestinian territory and Israel has no legal authority to take over anything. This is part of their annexation plan, also illegal under international law. By pushing out the indigenous population, this is a form of ethnic cleansing. By creating Israeli-only settlements in East Jerusalem is a form of apartheid, especially when the settlers are free to walk around with military-grade weapons, intimidating the Palestinian population. Separate roads are used. Israelis can roam freely while Palestinians are forced to move through checkpoints, moving through like cattle in cages. In Israel, Israelis have full rights where Palestinians are treated as second-class and third-class citizens. Palestinians are often jailed indefinitely with no charge, or maybe charged for participating in a peaceful protest against the injustices, or because a child, and mind you, children as young as 5 have been jailed, by the way, but maybe because a child threw a rock at a war tank. This indefinite jail is what they call administrative detention with no access to an attorney or family. They go in front of an Israeli court where they have 5 minutes to make their case, and often there's a language barrier. So imagine trying to translate your story in 5 minutes. Even Israelis who refuse to serve the mandatory military sentence are jailed because they refuse to be a participant in the occupation, the apartheid, and the ethnic cleansing of their Palestinian brothers and sisters. They're punished for refusing to violate another's human rights. But people often don't hear about what's happening. What is honestly happening. Instead, they want to begin in Gaza. All they want to do is discuss Gaza. But why start there? Why have a discussion of something out of context? You want to talk about Gaza and Hamas. Also, Hamas was established in the 1980s, and the occupation began decades earlier. Then you need to talk about the illegal under international law and the violent dispossession of the Palestinians from East Jerusalem, most recently the village of Sheikh Jarrah, by Israeli settler organizations and military. You need to talk about the Israeli placed restrictions on Palestinians from entering Jerusalem and the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, one of the holiest sites for Muslims. The tear gas and the stun grenades and skunk water used against Palestinians as they pray in the holy mosque, and especially during the holiest nights of the year for Muslim Palestinians during the holy month of Ramadan. You want to talk about Hamas, you need to talk about settler colonialism, occupation, apartheid, ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people committed by the Israeli state and sponsored by US tax dollars. So this is not a debate, and it's often approached as a debate. This is about humanity. This is about human rights. This is about the silence of world leaders of 73 years of violent occupation and oppression, ethnic cleansing are committed against Palestinians by the Israeli government. That's where we start. We should not fall for any political agenda from any side. We need to recognize the truth of what's really happening. And this is where we come in as United States residents and citizens. So we ask that you support humanitarian causes that can aid the Palestinian people, especially in Gaza. And you can do so by supporting Islamic Relief USA and the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. And also, as almost $4 billion of our tax dollars go to the Israeli military, we must contact our congresspeople to ask their support for House Resolution 2590. That's the Palestinian Children's and Families Act, which stops the use of our tax dollars to fund this occupation, apartheid, and ethnic cleansing. And also to keep researching what is happening. News and scholarly articles from all different sources, not just mainstream media. Social media and mainstream media are censoring the truth about what's happening to Palestinians. So keep researching and keep spreading the truth. This is how we learn. This is how we encourage our congresspeople to take action. And this is how we bring peace. So I'll leave it there and I yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Well, actually, Lara, you didn't have any more time, but that's okay.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's quite all right. Everybody, I've never known anybody who is involved in religion that does not tend to take just a few more minutes. You know, that's okay. That's okay. I was a teacher. I did the same thing.
I want to interrupt briefly just to go ahead and post the different call to action items on the chat for people to take home with them. And
okay.
Please take time to copy. Let's see, did it go through? I have to hit the enter key. Please take the time to copy before the meeting is over so that the information is not lost. Otherwise, you won't have access to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Safra. I appreciate that. Okay, so again, check the chat box once in a while. And again, if you have questions or comments you'd like to make, be sure to put them in the chat room and we're going to deal with those at the end. We're going to start the second round now. And again, I'm going to say 4 minutes. When you see the yellow card, you know, it's time to start thinking about how to wrap it up. But this time we're going to allow some cross-talking. Now this can get a little, you know, in Zoom, it's a little more difficult than it is sitting across from a table. I'm going to ask that you be patient with each other and polite and so forth. We're going to start over again with our first speaker, Imam Shady Alshorman. Imam, you have the floor for 4 minutes. And again, others may ask questions or may interject, but do so briefly if you could. Imam?
Yes, I am here.
Very
I'm
good.
wondering if anybody has any question.
3. Well, Imam, would you like to add some additional comments to your earlier comments, and then people can, then the panelists can come in and ask your question if they'd like. And again, this is only for the panelists to ask questions. Imam, if you have more comments you'd like to make.
You know, let me wait. If somebody has a question, I would like to answer their questions before I share.
Very good. Well, should I go on to the next speaker then? Would that be okay?
Okay, sure.
Would you like one of the panelists to ask you a question? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, if there is any question for me, I would be more than happy to answer.
Very good. Of the other 3 panelists, would you like to ask a question of the Imam? I'm referring to Lara, Mort, or Reverend Willard.
Imam Shady, what are some stories that inspire you for what can be done in the situation that we're faced, and especially given what the issues related to what Lara has lifted up.
Yeah, actually, I like what Lara said, but sometimes as educators or religious ministers, this issue is totally now like with politics. I wish we can, as a religious leader, can solve this problem, but politics plays, the major role in that. But for us as, religious leaders, we have no problem. We can live with each other. We understand each other, perfectly. We are seeking peace for everyone. But now the politics and misunderstand or fabricate our religions, and this is, the major point. I don't think so. There is any religion says, okay, you go and take any other land or evacuate, its people, and my book or my scripture says that. Absolutely, our scriptures don't say that.
Very good. Imam, would you also like to address, in your time that you have, what solutions do you see for the long term, the short term, and the medium term in the Gaza-Israeli conflict?
I think it's a tough question. I think we should have patience, pray for them, supplicate, and we should be united, raise our voice. And I think the issue now is not like before. This time is completely different. Even my students here in America, keep asking me about what's going on. Before everything used to be hidden. Nobody knows what's going on in Gaza, in Jerusalem, about the crimes, happened there. Nobody knows. But unfortunately now, everybody knows what's going on. One, two, the children in Gaza, nowadays are playing a magnificent job how to express their struggling, suffering, what they are facing. I think now everything is going to be different. Everything is doing, and we see what happened and the war stopped because, people use the social media, people talk, people post. Another thing, I think we should put, politics aside and try to bring peace among people in, Palestine, either Jews, Christian, and Muslims. They can live with, with peace. They can live with peace.
Do you still support the two-state solution that has long been the American objective foreign policy in the Middle East?
I don't know what to say about that.
Okay.
Yeah, but, I think, the people in Palestine are the one who can judge these solutions, accept this solution because they know what's going on and they know if this is, good for them or not.
Very good. I'm sorry. Just a second. What, dear? Okay. Very good. Are there other questions for the Imam from the panel? Imam Shady, do you have any additional comments you'd like to make?
Oh, no, I am okay.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Let's go on to our next speaker, Reverend Drew Willard. And again, I want to ask the panelists to consider the three questions I posed earlier. Why do you feel that this particular type of forum is important for people to participate in? What is your general assessment of the Gaza? And most of you have talked about Gaza-Israeli situation pretty clearly. And finally, what solutions do you see for the short, medium, and long term in the Gaza-Israeli conflict? And I'll go to Reverend Drew Willard, please.
I think I touched on what I felt were some priorities. But certainly with talking with or hearing presentation by Lara and also Mort has made me consider that one of the main motivations, I believe, and again, as an outsider looking in, I have had the opportunity to visit Israel. And one thing that is an impression that has stayed with me, the notion of never again, and going to Masada, visiting Masada, and what I know of the story of never again, and how the not the biblical but the historical event of the Holocaust informs much of Israel's policy, and the fear and resilience never to allow something like that again. And I think, to me, the Holocaust stands as an example for all situations where a people has been subject to genocide. And it happened to them, but that stands as an example for us all to prevent this kind of thing from happening to any people. And the thing is, though, we're seeing this happen to the Palestinian people. Perhaps not in the extent that Jewish people of Europe were subject to. But Lara used the term apartheid. And why these policies go against the basic teachings of the prophet, certainly the prophets who sought out social justice, challenged their kings to be just. At the same time, I'm hearing the obstinance of resistance, the unwillingness to compromise on either side. The role of Hamas as being, and I mentioned before, the notion of the strong man, the powerful one who uses violence to impose their will, as opposed to those who courageously enter the hostile territory to speak their truth. And I think that's the kind of thing that needs to happen more and more. There's a really important story in history with the Crusades, where Christians were invading Palestine. And one of the stories about an invasion of Egypt, where Francis of Assisi went along to see what these Crusades were about. And he was inspired to cross the desert to speak to the Sultan of Egypt. And he was received. And I think more of that kind of thing needs to happen. I've said that the problems are pervasive. It demands comprehensive responses. I think that means the comprehensive responses need to be on a personal level. Individuals crossing the lines to try to reach understanding, and that's dangerous territory because that person can be seen as a traitor. But I think that's part of what interfaith outreach tries to do, is to cross the division of ignorance, of fear, and find the humanity of the other, to transform an enemy into a friend. And I think, anyway, that's kind of an intermediate goal. But I think, again, I wanted to remember the significance of the Holocaust and the role and the importance of that for the Israeli people, but the reality also for the Palestinian people of homes destroyed, and where we need to go with that to change, to recognize these fears and the pain and the hatred, and how do we cross the abyss of these negative emotions to find a way through.
Reverend, to be fair, since I asked the question of the Imam, since the latter part of the Truman administration, the United States foreign policy has largely been geared toward trying to establish a two-state solution for the Israeli-Palestinian issue. Sometimes we've come close to it. Sometimes we're further away from it. We're very far away from it right now. Do you still support the two-state solution? Do you think the United States should continue that foreign policy goal?
This is controversial. I don't know quite what the way ahead with that is. I've seen, I think there was a plan that perhaps it was one that Clinton facilitated between Rabin and Arafat. And the thing is, it was a patchwork. It looked like a quilt. And that was.
I'm going to ask the observers to please mute yourselves and except for the panelists right now. Go ahead and continue, Reverend.
Okay. I think there needs to be substantial land that the Palestinians have. But I think that if that is going to happen, there needs to be a lot of trust established for that to take place. But I think it's unfair to have this patchwork of places that are Palestinian. Right now it's Gaza, but I think there needs to be a serious affirmation of the other and what they need to have a viable nation.
Thank you.
And Jerusalem being part of that.
Jerusalem's a sticky one. Do any of the other panelists have a question for Reverend Willard? Very good. Thank you, Reverend. I appreciate that. We'll go on to our third.
I have a question, if you don't mind.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, Pastor, do you think that a Christian can, in Jerusalem, can bring peace between Jews and Muslims?
Well, I have a graphic when I've done for the interfaith storytelling, and there's the Star of David and the half moon of Islam, and in between is a cross that looks like a plus sign. So yeah.
I hope so.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, Reverend Willard. Let's go to our third speaker now, and this would be Mr. Mort Hess. Mr. Hess, you have 4 minutes. And again, I ask you to think about solutions, short, medium, and long term.
I think that I want to thank Kara's presentation there as an example of one of the central issues that are blocking a peaceful solution here, and that is that both sides must choose vision over victimhood. There's a general feeling, I think, that people think that perceiving oneself as a victim somehow justifies acts that would otherwise be considered immoral. And that is, I think, must be rejected by all religions. There is right and wrong. There is a legitimate condemnation of taking lives. Israel was not the aggressor in 47. There could have been a Palestinian state. Much of what Palestine now claims as their territory, the West Bank and East Jerusalem and what have you, had substantial Jewish settlement in 1947 that would have been in the, however, they were swept out. You talk about maybe 600,000 Palestinian refugees. They were essentially kept they fled They fled to what was then occupied West Bank and Jordan and other countries around. They were not accepted in the population. They were kept in refugee camps for political purposes. At the same time, Israel took in maybe 750, 800,000 Jewish refugees from Palestinian lands who were persecuted and forced out, but they were absorbed into Israel. So that when we talk about being victims, I think that the inability to seek justice for all instead of justice for some is a perversion of any religion's idea of justice. The fact is that we are family. If Jews are my brothers, then Arabs are certainly my first cousins. I view this as a family dispute, and I think it's always better for families to come together and settle their dispute rather than to say, well, if I can get rid of them, everything's going to be fine, because it's not. Because if we destroy part of the family, we destroyed part of the world.
Mort, to be fair to everybody else too, the same question that I asked the Imam and the Reverend, President Biden yesterday reaffirmed the American foreign policy objective of an eventual two-state solution for the Middle East. Do you still think that the United States should pursue that goal with vigor?
It depends on your definition of two-state. I think that there can be you can have separate civil authorities in different areas, but there should be a free economic and essentially joint, let's say, public infrastructure kinds of things that's common to the whole, but have separate areas where civil authority has the authority in that area, but that neither be exclusively Arab or Jewish, Muslim or Jewish or what have you, but that I still hope that brothers can dwell together in unity, if not absolute proximity.
Thank you very much. And now we'll go to our final speaker. Again, Ms. Ghannam from CAIR, the floor is yours. And again, I ask you to think about solutions, short, medium, long-term. What can we do?
Sure. Well, so I guess I want to say that, you know, we're addressing this from different religious perspectives, but we also have to look that this isn't necessarily a religious conflict, but it's a human rights issue. So there are Palestinian Muslims, Christians, and Jews who are being oppressed under this occupation by the Israeli government. What I would like to bring to people's attention is that both Mr. Hess and Reverend Willard have had the opportunity to visit Israel, but Palestinians are often refused by the Israeli government the right to return to Palestine, myself included. American Jews are actually invited by the Israeli government to travel to Israel. But when they go, they're not allowed to visit the West Bank to see what's really happening on the other side of the apartheid wall, to see the truth of the occupation and the apartheid and the ethnic cleansing. Many young American Jews are actually refusing to go on these so-called birthright trips because they don't want to be a participant in the occupation, the apartheid, and the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. And while Americans of Jewish heritage are able to travel on these so-called birthright trips, Palestinians such as myself, who are forced into exile and living in the diaspora, such as the United States, are often refused re-entry to Palestine, even just for a visit. So neither government, let's be clear about this. I hope we're all on the same page about this, but neither government is a representation of the people on the ground. Not the Israeli government, not the Palestinian governments in the West Bank and in Gaza. Majority of the people on the ground want peace and they vie for peace. But you cannot have peace when an occupying power is abusing its power and not abiding by international law and human rights law. And, you know, we're talking about solutions, but none of us are living under the occupation. I may be a Palestinian, but I'm living here. I'm not living there. So I don't want to throw in a solution of what is best for people that are living under the occupation, because they should make that determination for themselves. But here in the United States, the solution is to hold the Israeli government accountable for their human rights violations. The international community has attempted to do this numerous times, including recently under the Trump administration, but the US continues to use their veto power and therefore no progress can be made. But once this move is made, once we're actually holding the powerful occupier accountable for their human rights violations, then the two sides can approach the peace process honestly and equally. So again, how can we get this done in the United States? This is where it comes to contacting Congress, asking them to support House Resolution 2590, asking them to stop the use of our US tax dollars to fund this occupation, because that is creating an imbalance of power. And you can't expect people to come to a peace process if they're not coming at it equally and with the same amount of power. So I guess that's my solution right now, is just follow the calls to action that were put in the chat, and hopefully with the push of social media and people are honestly telling what's happening in the occupied territories of Palestine and in Gaza, and even including in the state of Israel, hopefully we'll see the mainstream media picking it up, and hopefully that'll also put pressure on our US government to really hold their ally accountable and hopefully bring us to a more sensible peace process.
Well, again, to be fair, but I think I know what your answer is going to be. Do you support the United States foreign policy objective, generational now, of a two-state solution for Israel?
Yeah, you're right. My answer is, you know, we're not living there. So if it's two states, it shouldn't be imposed on them if they don't want two states. If they want one state, that should be discussed by the government of the Israeli government and the Israeli people and the Palestinian government and the Palestinian people. If they want a two-state solution, then there has to be coming to the table with the equal power and with the equal rights.
Very good. Thank you for that answer. Do any of the panelists have questions for Lara?
I do.
Mort?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we're now talking about, well, it's not equal, but the Israelis are all oppressive and what have you, and what have you. The fact is that in 1947, 48, and I was alive then, I remember it, there was no question of, well, let the people decide. It was the Arab armies coming in and threatening to throw all the Jews into the sea, and I remember that quite vividly. And the matter of fact is that there is no Arab country politician that is willing to even think to express the possibility of a Jewish state. You haven't admitted it. The fact is that any Arab politician that considers such a thing is just asking for his assassination, and that in the face of such implacable determination to exterminate the Jewish state, to talk about, oh, the Arabs are oppressed and what have you is I'm sorry, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth.
Okay. Lara, you can respond if you'd like.
Well, with all due respect, Mr. Hess, you're speaking now about politics, and I'm not talking about government, this and that, and who said what 70 years ago. That's actually a different panel that we could have. But for purposes of this panel, we have to recognize what's happening today. We have to recognize that this is an occupation, this is an apartheid, and this is ethnic cleansing. And it's not named by the Palestinian people. It's actually the international community is what defined it and what put it in their United Nations resolutions. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and so many others have named it like this based on the definitions created by the international community and the world leaders. So it's not the Palestinian people that are saying this is what's going on. This is the international community saying this is what's going on, and the United States refusing to recognize that. So we could get into politics, but I don't think that that's necessarily the route that they wanted to take on this panel today.
Well,
Mort, would you
I
like to
think
respond?
that to eliminate the historical basis here and to say, oh, well, you talk about this is what the international community said. Well, the international community back in 1947 said there should be the partition, and the Arabs said, no, we want it all. I mean, you know, Isaac and Jacob got this little piece of Canaan, and the Arabs got everything else, including all the oil. All we got was this land bridge that all the armies of the world were trampling over for 1,000 years. But apparently, even that is not an adequate patrimony from at least some of the Arab point of view. I can't accept that. I can't accept the idea that, first of all, from a religious perspective, the land does not belong to either the Jews or the Arabs. It belongs to the divine, and the people living in that land are expected to live up to the principles of religious brotherhood and human dignity and justice for everybody. No one wants to. No one. Certainly the Jews don't want to rule over Arabs anymore. But the fact is that for the past 70 years, Arab countries have made a part of their education of saying, oh, you know, we were robbed of our patrimony. As a matter of fact, before the war, there was no land occupied by Jews that hadn't been purchased from legitimate owners. Until that each side is willing to say that everyone has the same rights, then no one has any rights. I am more disturbed and critical about some of the Israeli government actions as you are, but I can and I can't justify them on the basis of Arab violence against Jews. But on the other hand, I too can't completely condemn them because, as you say, I'm not living there. Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna use the power of the moderator here to say, okay, we're gonna end that part of the discussion. You know, I like the way you both civilly disagree with each other. One of the nice things about being an American, and I used to always tell my students this, is that we can civilly disagree. Now, we've kind of lost track of that the last few years, it seems like, but we can rediscover that again. I also tell my students that one nice thing about America, we're not really a melting pot, more as we are a tossed salad. All different kinds of people here. All right, very good. At this point, Drew, you had a comment. Go ahead.
I just want to maybe just put two questions to Lara, and was also with this affirmation. I think you are well spoken and well read about the situation And I think you have a lot to contribute to making a difference. I'm wondering, you see the kind of challenge before you in trying to change somebody's mind or to make the point with particularly with the Jewish side of this question. I'm wondering, is there any possibility of reaching out to the Israeli side of this question? Do you have any contacts with anyone who might be sympathetic with the situation? Do you see what I'm saying? In the Israeli government. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the current Israeli government, well, not I think, I know that the current Israeli government is a right-wing nationalistic government. Again, they are not a representation of the Israeli people. They are not a representation of the Palestinian people living in Israel. They're not a representation of the Israeli Jews that are living in Israel. They're not a representation of the Jewish people across the world. So what we're asking is that there is so much history, and there's a lot of, let me use the word, propaganda fed from each side. And that's where research comes in. I grew up a certain way. I grew up in a Palestinian household, growing up in the diaspora, forced from exile. My father was born before the creation of the state of Israel. He lived before the creation, and he lived under the occupation until he was forced to leave forced to leave Palestine. So I have those stories, but also we're educated people, are we not? And I have an American education where I have so many resources that they don't have in Israel and they don't have in Palestine. In Israel, they might not have all of the history books that we have here in the United States. In Palestine, they might not have all the history books that go outside of what happened in Palestine. But here in the United States, I had the opportunity and the privilege of being educated, of going to law school, of learning different perspectives, of meeting different people and coming up to where I'm at today from these different perspectives, including, I used to actually have a professor in undergrad who was part of the Israeli military. And people wanted to join us together because they're like, you're Palestinian, he's Israeli, you guys would totally get along. And honestly, as a Palestinian, I'm approaching him as I'm scared, because what I've been approached with my entire life as a Palestinian is you don't exist. Your country doesn't exist. You're not a people. And imagine having to approach a former Israeli soldier and saying, I'm Palestinian, let's talk. It was very nerve-wracking. But he's totally for the peace process and served because it's a mandatory sentence. And it started off with, he came at it with a perspective, but he's never heard the Palestinian perspective. And that really changed his mind, and that really helped him to understand. And he's a professor of Middle East politics. And imagine that. And then, attending these meetings and these conferences, you have a lot of former Israeli soldiers who are so upset about what they had to do while they served. They're not always okay with being an occupier and jailing children and and harming other people, but they're forced to do it. Otherwise, they're forced to go to jail, which is actually now the tide has turned, where people they'd rather go to jail than serve in the military, in the Israeli military, because they don't want to be a part of the occupation. So myself being, having a direct contact with someone in the Israeli government, I haven't gotten that far, but I do have a lot of contacts, a lot of Israeli contacts who are just as educated and just want as much as this peace process as all of us here do. So it's not going to happen by the government. It's going to happen by the people power. We see that here in the United States as well. We're not seeing the tide changing in social justice movements because our government is deciding that they want it to happen. It's because of the power of the people. So that's what we're going to see in Palestine and in Israel, and through those people. Again, if they want it to be a one-state solution, I have a lot of Palestinian friends who say it should absolutely be one state, because why not? And then there's Palestinians where they say, well, we might be able to do a two-state solution, but we could definitely do it peacefully. But you cannot have a right-wing nationalistic government in power to get to that peace process. And you can't have unequal balances of power. There's not an equal balance of power. So I think maybe my time is up. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I think it's awesome. I think keep going, Lara. Okay. Remember Mort.
I think that
Remember Mort and
Absolutely, and I'm so honored to be on this.
I think you know, you talk about has to be a balance of power, but the fact is that if we had a single state with an overwhelming majority of Palestinians in charge of that, the Jews would have as much chance of surviving under Palestinian rule as if you look all around the Middle East. All right, you find that Arabs are more Arabs are being killed by other Arabs than have ever been killed by any Jews. I'd like to quote two Israeli politicians. One was Golda Meir, who said that we can forgive the Arabs for killing our soldiers. It is more difficult to forgive them for making us kill their children. One of the Palestinian objectives here is to make sure that some of their children get killed so they can have the propaganda advantage, so to speak. And the fact is they actually cherish the idea that children are being killed so they can put it out in propaganda. I can't understand it. The other quotation is from Abba Eban many years ago, who observed that the Palestinians have never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. There have been many occasions where peace and a Palestinian state could have been established, and it's been denied every time because they're not willing to take anything except everything.
Lara, there's a book by Howard Thurman called Jesus and the Disinherited, and it speaks specifically to the issue of how the oppressed and the oppressor are both suffer by what he called the three hounds of hell: fear, deception, and hatred. That could give you some insight. It's a book that Martin Luther King carried around with him, and the answer, the suggested answer that he felt to this was the politics of love as a strategy. And the beloved community it's not used in the book, but that is a term that comes from the civil rights era. And there is something about so I would encourage you to check out the writings of Dr. King, but this particular book was significant even to him.
Can you write that book actually in
I
the
am.
chat? Okay,
Yes, I am.
Thank you. All right, at this point, I'm going to exercise my awesome power as moderator to say that we move on to question and answer time. And I'm going to look to Anwar and Dennis to see if did we have any questions in the chat, gentlemen?
Thank you very much, Frank. Yes, there hasn't been any questions or something is coming through now. Oh, no, well, now Imam Shady had to excuse himself. He had to move on for another appointment. So no questions, and no questions from participants at this time.
All right. Can we, at this point, Dennis, unmute the audience and let them pose questions by raising hands?
The audience can feel free at this time to unmute yourself. And if you have questions, please join in the conversation. And while that's happening, I would just like to thank everyone, especially our panel for the wonderful discussion tonight, and especially Frank for being a great moderator. Okay, I do not see anything in chat, and I don't see any hands being raised right now.
Oh, I
If
see
we
an old
missed
friend of
that-
mine, John Heinberg, up there. John, surely you have a question.
Oh, okay.
Oh, it's just an old fellow I know, a fellow teacher. Well, anyway, do we have, oh, okay, I see one from Miss Laurie. You have your hand up. Would you like to ask?
Yes. I have a question for Mr. Hess. What is the best way for me as a non-Jewish, non-Arab person to engage my Jewish friends? Because they get very, very defensive if I say anything about, especially Gaza, what happened just now.
That question was directed to Mort, was it?
Yeah.
Mr. Hess? Okay, Mr. Hess?
I can't speak. I only speak for myself. I don't speak for the Jewish community. And I don't know your specific friends. I know that one of the grave consequences for the American Jewish community, as opposed to the Israeli community, is that they the pressures of the ongoing conflict is what has essentially created the current right-wing government in Israel that frankly I wouldn't want to live under. But on the other hand, that's a political situation, and I hesitate to criticize the politics of a country that I'm not living on, as Lara was saying, that she has the same thing in terms of not actually being on the ground, and neither of us really know the whole story of what's going on there. We get propaganda from both sides, and there are elements of truth in both sides and elements of exaggeration on both sides. Let's put it that way. But the point is that since the Holocaust, there is a extreme sensitivity to the idea that it can happen again. One of the principles of the establishment of the State of Israel was that there would be a place where refugees could go in from countries where it did happen again. Even in the United States here, there is a strong rising element of anti-Semitic action. There are right-wing groups here that are definitely anti-Semitic. I think that I can't surrender my belief in the common humanity of all of us. To me, and to most of the Jewish population, there was support, for example, for Muslim refugees to be brought to the United States, not because we thought that they might affect the politics against Israel, but because it was the right thing to do to protect refugees. I'd like to think that I'm a friend of the Muslim community in the United States. On the other hand, I cannot support actions which are aimed essentially at destroying and killing my fellow Jews in Israel.
Thank you.
I
for that.
have tried, oh, can I ask one
By all means,
follow-up?
follow-up question, yes.
I have tried posting on social media, especially amplifying Jewish Voice for Peace and J Street. Does that help?
I don't know. I avoid I avoid the I avoid the social media as much as possible. I think that it has as much potential for mischief, more potential for mischief than for benefits.
Very good. Are there any other questions from the audience? Just feel free to raise your hand or shout out so I can hear you. Again, you can unmute. Oh, Miss Laurie, did you have your hand up again? Nope. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any more hands. So Dennis, I'm thinking this may be a good time to wrap it up.
There we go. Yes, I would agree with you that I want to thank everyone for hanging in for the duration. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. Again, our panelists, our moderator, and it's greatly appreciated. And at least I learned something tonight, and I hope everybody else did as well. If no one else has anything else to say, I want to wish everyone
I'd like to make a quick comment. I want to thank everybody for inviting me and allowing me to participate in this. This is my first interfaith event that I've participated in, and I'd be happy to break bread with any of you, anytime. Thank you very much, Dennis, for inviting me.
You're very welcome, and thank you for being here. You were an excellent moderator, and it's greatly appreciated. So if that's all we have, thank you everybody so much, and please have a blessed evening.
Good night, everybody.
Shalom.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.